It started with an invitation, one that came wrapped in an aura of unease I couldn't quite shake. From the moment I read the words, a strange heaviness settled over me, like the air before a storm. A week ago, an old high school friend named Claire reached out to me after nearly a decade of silence. She claimed she had moved into her grandmother's estate, a crumbling Victorian mansion nestled deep in the woods of Black Hollow. "You've got to come see it," her message read. "It's beautiful. Weird, but beautiful." Despite the years of distance, curiosity got the better of me. Claire had always been the adventurous one, dragging me into bizarre situations that made for good stories later. I thought this would be another one of those adventures. I packed a bag and drove out to the secluded property on a Friday evening, with the GPS signal fading long before I reached the gates. The mansion loomed like a dark specter. Its windows, hollow and lifeless, stared into the abyss of the overgrown gardens. Shadows clung to the walls, making the entire structure appear as though it were alive, brooding in its isolation. The air carried a faint metallic tang, and as I stepped through the gate, the sensation of being watched prickled the back of my neck. Claire greeted me at the door, her smile too wide, her eyes too bright. Something about her felt off, but I pushed the thought aside, blaming my unease on the house itself. "You made it," she said, pulling me inside. "You're going to love it here." But as the heavy door shut behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a terrible mistake. The first night passed uneventfully, though I barely slept. The room Claire assigned me was freezing despite the roaring fireplace, and the silence was oppressive. Not the peaceful kind of silence you find in the countryside, but a heavy, unnatural stillness that seemed to press against my ears. Around 3 a.m., I woke to a sound, a faint whisper, like someone speaking just outside the door. I held my breath, straining to listen. The words were indistinct, but the tone was sharp and insistent. Gathering my courage, I opened the door. The hallway was empty, but the whispers continued, echoing faintly down the stairs. Claire's door was closed, and I debated waking her. Instead, I crept down the grand staircase, the whispers growing louder with each step. They led me to a room at the end of the hall, a door slightly ajar. Pushing it open, I found myself in the library. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Their spines were worn, and the titles had long since faded, adding to the library's mysterious aura. At the center of the room stood a pedestal holding an open book. The pages were blank, but the whispers seemed to emanate from it, filling the air with a strange, electric hum. When I stepped closer, the book snapped shut, and the room plunged into darkness. The next morning, Claire acted as if nothing was wrong. She gave me a tour of the mansion, her excitement almost childlike. But as we walked through the labyrinth of rooms and corridors, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was alive, its walls watching and listening. "This is my favorite room," Claire said, leading me to a large chamber with mirrored walls. The mirrors were tarnished, their surfaces warped and distorted. Standing in the center of the room felt like being surrounded by ghostly versions of myself, each reflection slightly out of sync. "It's weird, isn't it?" Claire said, her voice echoing oddly in the space. "Sometimes I think the mirrors show things they shouldn't." I laughed nervously, but the air in the room felt wrong, heavy with a presence I couldn't see. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. In one of the mirrors, my reflection didn't move. It stared at me. Then, after a pause that felt like an eternity, a twisted grin spread across its face. I blinked, and it was gone. By the third day, I was ready to leave. Claire's strange behavior and the unsettling atmosphere of the house were too much. But when I brought it up, she grew agitated. "You can't leave," she said, her tone sharp. "Not yet. Not until you see it." "See what?" I asked, but she just smiled that too wide smile and walked away. That evening, she insisted we explore the basement. I refused at first, but Claire's persistence wore me down. The stairs were narrow and steep, and the air grew colder with each step. At the bottom, the basement opened into a cavernous space lit by a single, flickering bulb. The walls were covered in strange symbols carved into the stone, their edges glowing faintly. At the center of the room stood a stone altar, and on it lay the book from the library. Its pages were no longer blank. They writhed with words that seemed to shift and squirm, as if alive. Claire approached the altar, her movements stiff and unnatural. "It's almost time," she whispered, her voice not entirely her own. I tried to leave that night, but the front door wouldn't budge. Every window I tried was locked tight, and my phone had no signal. Claire was nowhere to be found, and the house felt more alive than ever. The walls seemed to pulse, and I swore I could hear faint laughter echoing through the halls. Desperate, I returned to the library, hoping to find something, anything, to explain what was happening. The book was gone, but the whispers remained, louder now and more insistent. They led me to a hidden door behind one of the shelves, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling downward. At the bottom, I found a chamber identical to the basement, but larger. The symbols on the walls glowed brightly, casting eerie shadows. In the center of the room stood Claire, her eyes black as coal, her body rigid and trembling. The book floated before her, its pages turning rapidly as if by an unseen hand. "It's awake," she said, her voice a guttural rasp. "And it's hungry." Before I could react, the symbols on the walls flared, and a dark, shapeless form emerged from the shadows. It moved like smoke, but its presence was suffocating. I felt it reach into my mind, pulling at my thoughts, my memories. "Run," Claire whispered, her voice breaking. "It can't take both of us." I ran. The walls seemed to close in around me, the house twisting and reshaping itself into a maze. The whispers followed me, growing louder, angrier. Doors slammed shut behind me, and the air grew thick with the stench of decay. Finally, I reached the front door. It burst open with a deafening crack, and I stumbled out into the cold night air, gasping for breath. Relief washed over me, but the urgency to escape remained, driving me forward without looking back. Behind me, the mansion groaned, its windows shattering as an unearthly howl filled the air. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. As I sped away, the house collapsed in on itself, consumed by darkness. I never saw Claire again. The police found no trace of her or the mansion, as if it had never existed. But I know what I saw, and sometimes, late at night, I hear the whispers in my dreams, calling me back to the woods.